Happy
What
Wednesday to you.
is up? Just
Not
another
much,
average
man.
Wednesday.
Just another day in the neighborhood. Good to see you. All right, so we're on live. We've got some exciting news to share. Something that the SMB, SBA space has been looking for some time. Let me just make sure we're live here. We are. Okay. So for some time now, and I'll moderate, Kevin. You give us the
Let's do it.
punchline in just a second. But for some time now, we have been uh, looking for a change in the partial change of ownership rules that were implemented about a year ago, and it's here. So very exciting news for the entire SBA, SMB, and at the end of this, I'll tell you why this is really important. I think for the space in terms of protecting buyers and making sure that these transactions are made in the most sound way possible. But for the audience's benefit, my name is Eric Pacifici. I play an attorney online called SMB Attorney. We run SMB Law Group, which is a boutique law firm um, that caters mostly to small business buyers and sellers. We've done a few $1 billion of transactional work in the small business space in the last few years since inception in 2022. So this message will be very important to our clients.
Yeah.
Disclaimer, this is for educational, informational purposes only. We're not your lawyer. Consult your own advisors. And if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with us. But entrepreneurial risk prevails. So, anyways, welcome. The backstory. So, Kevin, up until a year ago, if you wanted to buy a small business and you wanted to use SBA 7A acquisition financing to do it, which is a fantastic debt product that is sponsored by the Small Business Administration. Until a year ago, you had to buy 100% of that business. It was not possible to have any rollover equity in the transaction, much like what you see in many more sophisticated mid-market and upmarket M&A deals. The seller philosophically had to walk away from the deal. A year ago, those rules changed. So, Kevin, I'll turn it over to you. Give us the backstory. What changed 1 year ago?
Yeah, I guess it was about a year and a half ago, though it took some time to implement. I think it was May of last year. The SOPs were updated. And they basically, I mean, just to cut straight to the chase, they changed the rules to allow for a partial change of ownership. And so there were a lot of problems with the old rule, putting aside kind of traditional search community acquisitions, even things, there was trouble with like one partner wanting to buy out the other partner, things like that had to be navigated. So this opened up an entire new kind of opportunity to structure deals where maybe there's a partnership and one partner wants out and someone else wants to take their spot. They can now use SBA financing to do that. They don't have to buy 100% of the new company. And there was really previous to that, there was no way to structure around it because they look all the way up through beneficial ownership. So even if you tried to get cute and say, I'll buy 100% of the company, but the one owner that wants to stay behind can just come, be an equity holder upstairs at my new entity. None of that worked until this new rule change. So that started, I think it was really probably like summer into the fall last year. The timeline's fuzzy where those changes actually started being implemented. And one of the things that became very clear as people really got deep into the rules and began to understand it is the only way that the partial change of ownership would work is if the owner that was retaining ownership kept their equity ownership in the existing company. They had to sell a portion to the new buyer and retain the rest of the equity. So if they're selling 80% of the company, they're really just selling 80% of the stock or membership interest that they own directly to the buyer, which causes it causes a number of problems, but the biggest glaring one that we'll probably talk the most about here is, and we've talked a lot before about this. Asset deals are generally the preferred structure to do a small business acquisition. And if you have to buy stock directly from the seller with the remaining seller just keeping some of their stock, you're stuck with a stock deal. You lose a lot of the benefits, subject to some caveats, of being able to do an asset deal. So it was a huge development. It really was a big shift in access to 7A financing, but it really pigeonholed you in terms of how you could structure your deal. And that's how we've been operating for the past year plus. We've done a number of these deals and gotten used to how banks interpret these rules and the SBA stance on how the rule worked. And one thing we kept hearing over and over again, apparently the SBA was hearing over and over again, is how frustrating it was that you were pigeonholed into this one specific transaction structure type.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that brings us to today.
Well, and it went through a process, right? So the rule technically changed in the spring, and then it was summertime, and there was some confusion about personally guarantee this, whether the seller was going to have to personally guarantee the debt. And initially, the thinking was the seller would have to personally guarantee the entire debt, no matter how much they rolled over. And then ultimately, it was no, if they're sub 20%. So, much like I suspect this will, it went through a process of kind of figuring out what the rule actually means, and then what bank credit committees will allow,
Yeah.
and then the actual implementation of the rule. And to put some numbers on what you described, Kevin, which I think we'll get back to in a few minutes, what the implications is. Typically, the vast majority of Main Street SBA M&A transactions happen as asset deals, and
That's
they
right.
happen as asset deals because when you buy the assets of a business, you do not inherit the historical liabilities of that company. Very important. In a small minority of cases, there are businesses that it's not feasible to only buy assets because of important licensure or important contracts that cannot be transferred over in an asset deal. Like, for example, if you own a physical therapy clinic and that physical therapy clinic gets 70% of its revenue from a Blue Cross Blue Shield payor contract, and that contract is not transferable, instead of buying the assets, you would buy the stock of the business. Or if there was really important tax implications for the seller, such that they said, I'm not selling this business unless it's a stock deal.
Yep.
And that injects a lot of risk into the transaction because all of the liability that's accrued to the target entity is now yours, save for what you're able to allocate contractually, right?
Right.
But there are limitations to that. And structurally, in an asset deal, if you've got a $10 million IRS bill or lawsuit or whatever that shows up on your door after closing for something the seller did, you get to say thank you for this, but go talk to him or her, the seller. In an equity deal, it's yours, and you have to figure out how you're going to try to allocate that to the seller in the contract or own it, such that many sophisticated buyers in the small business, micro PE, private equity space won't even entertain a stock deal or an equity deal. And if they do, only at a significant discount. And to put some numbers on it, I would say that the market practice was 10 to 15% of deals were asset deals pre-partial rollover. And then in our figures that we shared a few months ago, that I think was pretty shocking and shocked the readers, that equity deals have ballooned to 40% of market transactions, roughly,
Mm-hmm.
which is very potentially problematic medium term and long term for SBA default rates and potential liability. So for quite some time, people have been trying to figure out how we do an asset structure in a rollover. And we've had a few buyers in our practice, Kevin, that have gone very, very far and pushed it all the way to the SBA general approval process, where you actually go to the SBA for approval to try to make it work. Okay, so that's the history. So pausing there, Kevin. So what happened today? What's the change?
Well, not exactly today, last week.
Last week. Yep.
But the SBA has released a procedural order updating certain aspects of the 7A program SOPs to basically solve this problem and allow for what they're calling, let me actually pull the document back up so I don't misquote here, what they're calling a multi-step partial change of ownership. The procedural order, it's like 14 pages long. It actually did a number of other things, many of them less relevant for the 7A program. So this is just kind of a one-page snippet out of the order. But they have clarified and are updating the rule to make clear that you can now engage in a partial change of ownership through what they're characterizing as a multi-step transaction. What those in the M&A world and certainly those that have been around the private equity and independent sponsor world would just, historically have called rollover equity. And so the idea is rather than a single step transaction, buyer buys X percentage that's less than 100 from seller. It's now a multi-step transaction where buyer forms a new entity, buys the business of seller, seller takes equity in the buyer entity and retains ongoing ownership through the new buyer entity. And that qualifies now as a multi-step partial change of ownership for the same treatment as the partial change of ownership has, previously been permitted. And so what that means for structuring a deal is that that new buyer entity can purchase all or substantially all of the assets of the selling operating entity, and a portion of the payment for purchasing those assets can be, rollover equity in the new purchaser entity. So that this opens obviously the doors to be able to now engage in a partial change of ownership transaction of this style while doing an asset deal and getting all of the other benefits of an asset deal, which includes, liability protection, step up in basis on the assets, and things like that. Again, subject to some caveats and how you structure the new equity, things like that. But that's the new rule. It was issued, I guess, about a week and a half ago, but with effect as of December 6th. And as I read the procedural notice, the kind of implementation of the changes of the rules was immediate as of the effective date. So it's not like the more substantive overhaul of last year where they put out the notice, but the implementation was deferred down the road. This is, as of the moment they published this, this is the new rule.
Okay, fantastic. And in the comments below, and I realize we have the wrong title on the live stream here, so we'll have to fix that. But
Oh, yep.
in the comments below, I will drop the actual rule release. So let's get that shared. If you could, Kevin, from your post here. Yeah, here it is right here. I'm going to go ahead and drop
Yeah,
that below.
I posted a screenshot there. Let me pull back up the actual. I could pull up the link and post the actual direct link to download the entire notice for people that want to read it.
Please do. Yeah, we'll drop that below. So anyways, okay, so let's talk about implications. And for those folks that are just joining us, the the news here is that the SBA has changed the partial rollover rules. Previously, in order to buy only a portion of a business and allow the seller to roll over, it had to be structured as an equity deal. Now it can be structured as an asset deal, which is a very important change. Why do you want the rollover of equity? This is a very common mechanism, just to zoom out, that's used in mid-market M&A to incentivize sellers. Very common for private equity funds and the like to buy a business and to have the seller actually roll over a portion of their equity to incentivize them to continue to build the business while taking some chips off the table. So a very common structure that's utilized in M&A that previously until a year ago wasn't allowable at all in Main Street deals, then was allowed in equity deals, and now will be allowed in both asset and equity deals. So why is this important? This is important because the risk profile of an equity deal on Main Street is much less advantageous than the risk profile of an asset deal. What
Yeah.
does that mean? It means if you buy the equity of a business, you inherit all of the historical liabilities, which in a small business, if those of you who have been in and around small business, any business, but small business in particular, it seems like there is a lot of possibility for historical problems that have happened in the business that can be business killing, right? I always say you go buy a $50 million business in a mid-market transaction, a $10 million lawsuit's not going to put you out of business. But in a small business deal, you go buy a 2, 4, 6, 8, $10 million business and you have that same $5 to $10 million lawsuit because just as foreseeable in small business. It's it's an existential threat to the business. So
Yep.
with the asset structure, you're able to insulate yourself from that to a much greater extent. Very important. The rise that we saw in equity deals post the partial changeover or partial rollover rule changes to me was very concerning, right? For a whole bunch of reasons. Um, and this is going to help mitigate that to some extent.
For sure. Um, so I'm just getting the link up here now. Oh, you can't comment on the live stream. I'll go back and post it on the places where we posted about the live stream. Um,
Yeah. So, all right, quick plug. I'm wearing my Uncommon Elite T-shirt, Kevin. Kevin and I are.
Heyo, where's mine?
Hey, you need to ask Christian nicely. But
I guess.
Kevin and I are partners in a venture called Uncommon Elite, run by Christian Ruff, who was a helicopter pilot for the 160th Night Stalkers. Fantastic guy. Many people in our small business community know Christian well. And the number one issue that our clients have as business buyers are who's going to run the business, right? And in most cases, most searchers run the business in the short term. Independent sponsors a little bit different, but suffice to say, long-term objective of every business owner is how do I find a competent person to run the business? Christian is solving that problem by creating a pipeline for special forces operators to be placed in small business. You're talking about Navy SEALs, Delta Force, 160th, the best of the best um, elite members of military special forces that now are creating a pipeline to find them into good positions in these businesses, and a ton of success already in placing those folks. So if you are a business owner and you're looking for some operational support and you think that culturally your organization will be a good fit for somebody who's a high performing, disciplined special forces type veteran, reach out to us or Christian. We'd be happy to see if there's a fit.
Love it. It actually it provides really interesting context because a lot of the times when folks who are looking for operators are doing they're doing larger roll-ups, holdco models, et cetera. They've got portfolio companies that need operators, things like that. Obviously, what Christian and Uncommon Elite and what we're doing there isn't limited to that, but that is a pretty common model in the M&A world. And just to kind of circle back to the topic at hand, that's part of what these changes to the partial change of ownership and why you would want to do a partial change of ownership. It's part of what it would allow, right? When traditional private equity is doing a rollover transaction, they're largely doing it because they're wanting to add either a new platform or grow a platform. And so they're investing a bunch of money to buy out the seller, to put a bunch more resources behind growing a platform, but they want the seller to continue to be the operator, to continue to grow that company, just with the backing of either a larger platform or private equity fund behind it. Obviously, private equity funds don't get access to the SBA world, but it allows folks who are more interested in that model to more easily get started with these structures, the flexibility that this offers, because now you can do a platform roll up style structure for your first or second deal through an SBA loan, where you may want that seller, they're having a large exit, but they're retaining a big piece of the equity to continue as the operator for that platform and push things forward. So love the structural updates here. I think we were already seeing more of the general kind of direct single step partial change of ownership. I think we'll see a lot more of the multi-step now that this becomes a thing, and Christian and others will be out there to kind of help support that as those things push forward. I do think it bears noting, because this came up in a conversation earlier after my post, questions that other people had been asking. So I know others who are reading this are kind of questioning things out there. If you look at the procedural notice, there's a portion just above where it talks about the multi-step partial change of ownership that in classic SBA fashion is, in my opinion and reading, very poorly and very inarticulately drafted, and it's caused a little panic. Essentially, to cut to the chase, folks reading it and interpreting it to mean that this new multi-step partial change of ownership is allowed, but any seller that's retaining equity has to fully backstop the loan and guarantee the loan. I don't think that's what it's saying, and so it bears noting. It's a little misleading because the lead into that section, the title is partial change of ownership. And the language talks about in a partial change of ownership of the SOP, they use the word individual, where they didn't adequately clarify if that was limited to a person or an entity. And what they clearly meant was a person or an entity.
Yeah, and let me
And so,
just let me put that language up on the screen here, Kevin. We can
yeah,
unpack
yeah, for
that.
sure. Let's
Uh,
just talk through it.
yep.
Um, so this is the multi-step partial change of ownership. So, so this is just the screenshot. Pull up the PDF and the link that I posted
Mhm.
below some of these posts, Eric. And let's just look at the language real time together because I think this question is going to come up a lot. It may download as a PDF. I don't know if it's going to. Oh no, it did open in your browser. Great. Go down to page 9.
Okay.
Scroll down right here. So this is the page before the announcement that we're talking about, and it's really confusing because they call this section partial change of ownership, but watch what they did here. They talk about the confusing nature of the word individual in the actual SOP when it was meant to refer to either a human or an entity. And it says SBA is updating the language to avoid confusion by revising and deleting the word individual in the following sections. Again, this is under the heading partial change of ownership. However, that first section they refer to there, paragraph A2F Romanet 2, that's not talking about partial change of ownership. That's talking about 100% change of ownership. The next section, A2G1, that's talking about one partner buying out the other partner. So as you scroll to the top of page 10, this one, A2H1, is the only one here that's talking about partial change of ownership. And it's important to realize that it's revising the word. If you see where it says persons, that's a defined term in the SOP to mean either a human or a legal entity. It used to say individual. So this used to say both the business and the individual who is acquiring ownership interest must be co-borrowers in the loan. Some folks out there were reading this and scratching their heads and saying, well, this is really weird because now this is basically saying that the new buyer entity is the borrower, and they assumed that meant that the seller has to guarantee the loan. And so it bears clarifying. They're just talking about the co-borrower on the loan itself. What this is saying is if you end up with a parent subsidiary structure where new buyer is still going to do an asset purchase of the target company or something like that. Both entities are co-borrowers on the loan, but the guarantee rules still apply. So if that parent buyer entity now has the seller rollover equity, but it's below 20%, the rule still generally applies that seller's not going to have to guarantee the loan. I had a call with another um, uh, person in the lending space in the area earlier. This person had already had a handful of questions from folks wondering if this really does anything, if the seller is going to have to guarantee the loan. So I may be getting a little too hyper technical, but I just wanted to point out for those who are reading the actual notice, as I went back through and tied out to the actual SOP and what the changes were. This is really just clarifying who the borrower entity is with obligation to repay. It's not affecting the individuals that actually have to guarantee that.
Okay. Well, the good news is half our audience just went to sleep, so we really appreciate that
Beautiful.
technical breakdown there, Kev. No, I'm just kidding.
It's almost
Thank you
9
for
p.m.
getting.
out there,
Yeah.
Eric.
So
So
yes, let's wrap up, and I think I'll conclude. I'll summarize again if anybody just joined us, but SBA has changed the rules on partial rollover. You can now do it with an asset structure, which is fantastic. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll give you the last word, Kevin, is a general reminder to people that partnering with a seller in a transaction is not always a good decision, whether it's a stock deal or an asset deal. You're partnering with somebody that you don't know. You know, you have a period of time, 60, 90, maybe 120 days at best, to get to know this individual. You're rolling over equity. Please make sure, at a minimum, if you're going to do that, that you have a mechanism, a call right or whatever, to get the equity back from them if they decide to depart the business or if things aren't working out. Very common for these relationships to sour post closing. In most cases in these transactions, you've got a young person coming in with lots of ideas and energy, and you've got somebody that's at the tail end of their career that, isn't exactly, going to be excited to watch you do better than they did. So not always a environment that breeds success. So even though it's available, you may want to tread lightly, stock or asset structure. And you can always, if you want an operator and you want to equitize them, you can always bring a partner along with you. Again, Uncommon Elite, if you want to reach out and find somebody to work with you in the early stages, um, give them equity. That's a person you'll know much better if they've come along with you than the seller. So with that, Kev, I'll give you the last word here.
Yeah, no, I mean, just to underscore that, we don't do a ton of partial changes of ownership for some of the reasons you point out, plus the stock sale, but they happen routinely enough to have the data points for me to pretty confidently say, at least for me, I don't know what your portfolio looks like, Eric, but I could pretty confidently say the majority of partial change of ownership deals I've been involved in um, are the remaining seller and the buyer are not on great terms. Like it has
Yep.
not gone well for every possible reason you could imagine. But first and foremost, again, when this is big private equity, really sophisticated sellers and buyers that have been around the block and understand what it means to have new ownership and equity capital injection and things like that. That's one thing. This is Main Street. And these sellers that spent 30 years building this business and all of a sudden own 15% of it, but are still involved, have a very, very hard time decoupling being the owner and the boss post closing. And it leads to a lot of friction, a lot of misalignment in vision. And that's one of several reasons why it can be a cautionary tale. So I certainly agree with you. Even with expanded access to the structure and the ability to engage in these partial change of ownership transactions in a way that better protects you as a buyer, it still isn't something that should be taken lightly for all the reasons Eric said. So I don't know that I have much final words beyond that, other than stay tuned. This is brand new. We'll see how these still deals start getting done, and we'll start hearing from more and more lenders and other people in the banking space, the both
Yep.
on legal and the actual lending space, and how their banks will start implementing things like that. So
Well,
the
and I said last word, but that no, but we need to make that point, right? The point is the banks all interpret the SBA SOPs differently, right? And they have to adhere to prudent lending standards. So simply because something becomes available, a new tool in the toolbox according to the technical rules, does not necessarily mean that all of the banks or any of the banks or particular banks are going to interpret the rules that way. So
Yep,
if you're in process right now and you want to quickly flip over to this structure, it's quite conceivable that your bank's going to say, no, 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 no. Like we're not ready for that. We're not interested in that. And it will take the market a while to kind of read these rules, get familiar with them, and start implementing them. And some may say, we don't want to do it. We read it different than you do, and we
100%.
disagree. So
Yeah,
we'll see what happens.
fun times, Eric.
Yeah,
Looking forward to
a
the
new
next one.
a new
Let
tool
let
in the tool belt. It's good.
let's see what breaking news happens next week.
Yeah, for sure. Have a good night, Kev.
See ya.